Hello and welcome, my lovely psychology students, to another session of the module on issues and debates. In this session, we're looking at the nature-nurture debate, a nice little spec link, importance of heredity and environment in determining behaviour, and also the interactionist approach. Now remember, exam hint, and I've said it many times, is that it is really important that you understand the specifics of what the spec is asking for, because that means they can ask specific questions on those areas rather than just general questions. For example, on the nature-nurture debate, they may ask a specific question on heredity or the interactionist approach. So it is really important to be aware of the spec links. So let's get a start with it. My first question I'm going to ask is, what is the nature-nurture debate? Now, I am sure you will be able to tell me, because I'm sure throughout your whole high school career, you have come across this debate. You'll be able to tell me what nature is and what nurture is, but let's look at it, just a brief explanation with a slight link to psychology. This debate looks at the question of whether characteristics such as intelligence and personality are caused by innate influences, right? Remember, innate, we're born with, so that means internal factors, or caused by the results of learning, environmental forces. Now, our learning, we learn from our environment, so that's external forces. So when we're talking about innate influences, we're talking about nature. If we're talking about learning and environmental, we're looking at external, so we're looking at nurture. And that's what this debate's all about. It's looking at, within psychology, things like behaviour, IQ, our gender roles, the behaviours that we carry out. Are they caused by a predetermined innate force, so internal factors, or are they caused by a predetermined external force in which we learn those behaviours? So let's make a nice little start in just looking at pure nature and pure nurture. So we'll start with the nature debate. Now, within the nature debate, we're going to be looking at the internal influences that lead to behaviour being predetermined or pre-programmed. I don't like that word, pre-programmed, into us before the environment has any form of influence or any effect on us. So it's looking at these innate forces, and we would refer to them as innate characteristics because they are features, for example, of our personality that are with us from our birth. So perhaps our temperament. So they're born within us, and therefore part of our biological makeup, rather than anything that we've learned in response to our situation. So they're looking at these innate characteristics. Such behaviors are believed to be genetics. They're in our genes, and they are made up, or they make up part of our DNA as our physical character. Just like our physical characteristics, like eye color and the size of our feet, so do our behaviors have this innate genetic cause. It is believed that these features are inherited, so genetic inheritance. So they're passed on from one generation to the next. And I'm sure we've all heard saying, yeah, I'm more like my mum in my my mannerisms, there we go, rather than my dad. Or I'm more like my granny than my mum or my dad. So that means if we have these manners, so therefore these behavioural characteristics, genetic inheritance, it's passed on from one generation to the other. Now there's a nice little patch. Let's link back to one of the philosophers of our time, Diathesis. He's a nativist, and I'll explain what that is in a minute, stated that human characteristics are a result of heredity. So that means they're passed on from one generation, so therefore they are innate, they are born within us, so therefore an internal factor that causes our behaviour. Just so that you understand what we mean by nativists, these are a set of theories that are put forward by a group of people which believe that human abilities and development or processes are innate. And I do like the use of this word, hardwired at birth. That means they're already in us, they're hardwired. So these theories form our beliefs about the developmental process and must be closely associated. For example, I've just got an example there of language acquisition. But also it could be we're biologically female, so that is going to be hardwired in us, and therefore we're going to have a gender that is associated with it. So that's what nativists believe. They believe we are born with it, and therefore from that starting point, so nature, it develops. Now, when it comes to genes, to see how influential our genes are, we use what is referred to as hereditary coefficient. And this range is from 0 to 1. What we mean by 0, 0%, 1 equals 100%. And that means if, for example, we are looking at certain characteristics, for example, it is believed, and we looked at it within psychopathology with depression, they said there was a hereditary coefficient of 0.5. So that means it says 50% from a biological perspective is that it's down to our genes. But what it's saying is that our genes have that starting point. So if it's 0.5, that means it's 50% is accomplished. If it was 1, that means it would be 100% down to our genes. If it was 0, like I've said before, our genes have no influence. But according to the nature debate, it's our genes as our starting point. So 50% of our behavior, for example, in depression, is a genetic basis, and therefore it develops thereafter. So it has a genetic basis. 50% of it is down to our genes. So very much the nature debate with regards, just going back to that depression, they looked at twin studies on it, and they found actually that 49%, so that would be 0.49, of monozygotic twins, remember what does monozygotic means? Remember mono is 1, so that's 1 egg splits into 2, and we get identical twins, was 49%. So if one monozygotic twin got it, there was 49% genetically that the other one would have it. Whereas in dizygotic twins, it was only 17%. So genes played a less influential role. Whereas in the monozygotic twins, genes played a bigger contributing role. When they just looked at normal siblings, so non-twin siblings, it was only 9%. So genes only played a 9% role in the development of depression. And that's what we use the hereditary coefficient for, to see how influential genes are. But according to the monozygotic twins, actually, it was virtually 0.5, so 50% genes played a contributing factor. So when you look at the nature debate, we're looking at these, and I do like that word, hardwired factors within us that can account for our behavior. Now, a nice little AO3 link here, and I'll link it into the other one as well. We can use our knowledge from another debate here. I've used words like predetermined. They're hardwired, right? They're already pre-existing. So this is very much, yes, biological approach, but it's very much supporting the idea that our behavior, according to the nature side of the debate, is predetermined. So we could bring in the other debate of determinism. We've got biological determinism, but it's also hard determinism as well. We can link both of those and turn them into a great AO3 here. Let's move on to our nurture debate. Now, with regards to our nurture debate, what's it all about? It's about the external influences that lead to behavior being learned after we are conceived or born. Ooh, I do like that, conceived or born. I bet you some of you thinking, what's happening here, Mrs. Smith? Well, let's talk about the levels of the environment. Now, backtrack a minute. Nurture, it's how we learn our behaviors, and it's the experiences that we have within the environment. Now, Learner identified that we've got to clarify the environment, and there are different levels within the environment, but we'll keep it simplistic. It was identified we have a prenatal and postnatal environment. Prenatal, before birth, Postnatal, after birth. Now you might be thinking, well, there's not going to be any environments prenatal. Of course there are. That fetus, that from the moment it's conceived, it is placed into an environment, the womb of the mother. Now, how the mother interacts with her environment, so perhaps she might drink, she might smoke, that's going to influence the environment of the fetus, the unborn child. So again, that environment, so for example, if that mother is an alcoholic, the child could and will be influenced by that alcohol from its environment. And it can get alcohol fetus syndrome. And that could actually affect and cause it to have learning difficulties because it's the environment it's in. Because of the influence of the alcohol within the womb, and then how that infant takes it on, is going to be very influential. So again, we can see levels of the environment. I'll just give you another little example. Perhaps during birth was quite difficult. The child was starved of oxygen. Before birth, the child was perfectly normal. But because the environment during birth starved the infant of oxygen from the environment it was in, it could cause it to then have learning difficulties. So it really does show you how influential the environment is. So the nurture debate is all about the environment and our experiences within that environment. Bring in one of our other philosophers, Locke, an empiricist, there we go, states that the mind is black at birth. And what he means by black, or it's also said in your book, it says blank. But what it means by blank, that means there's nothing there. In his original text, he does talk about mind as black. That means there's nothing there, there's nothing filling it up. You can use the word blank as well, that's perfectly acceptable. And it is only developed through experience and learning. That experience and learning we have is from our environment. So empiricism, obviously founded by John Locke, states that the only source of knowledge comes through our senses. And what he means by that is our experiences, our senses, from what we smell in our environment, what we taste, what we see, what we interact with. And also, it's aspects of scientific knowledge that are closely related to experience. Experiencing is observable, so it's overt experience that we learn from. So very much linking to the scientific process here, a nice link to that there. So we can clearly see that, just like I said on the nurture one, if you're discussing what these two debates are, you can bring in this, because again, this is deterministic. It's saying it's the environment that determines our behavior. So again, it's preset because of the environment. So we've got environmental determinism. So if I was talking about nature, nurture, I would bring that in as a nice AO3. But we can also bring in the idea of the concept of nativism and empiricalism. Again, because these are extreme views, they only see nature or they only see nurture, we can actually bring this in as an evaluation because of the implications it can bring about with them if we only see behavior in that way. So there's clear implications that can be used to explain human behavior. Nativist's extreme deterministic view that our inherited genetic makeup can lead to controversy, linking to example race and intelligence. And just remember when we did I'm rambling on here, right, back on track. Remember when we did social sensitive research, when we looked at ethical implications, when I think it was the first session that we did on the issues and debate approach, we looked at a piece of research that said genetically, the further you are north in the world, the higher your intelligence. The further you are south genetically, or where your origins come from, your heritage comes from, it will decrease your IQ. Remind yourself of that study. And that is a problem with nativists. They're actually saying that we are predetermined because of our genetic makeup. And that is a bad thing. that's got implication because then you're seeing one ethnicity to be perhaps more intelligent, more superior. It reinforces discrimination, prejudice, racism, all those key factors. So that is a key issue in the implications of those. Now, when it comes to the empiricalists and their view, there's also clear implications because it can be down to behaviour manipulation. If it's saying that we're born with, according to behaviourists, a blank slate as well, we can manipulate people's behaviour to get them to behave in a certain way. And therefore, that's not good. That means we can have policies set up to manipulate people, reward certain behaviours and punish certain other ones that the powers of that society see to be fit, and therefore manipulate people. So again, they are nice AO3 here as well, linking it to these both extreme views. Remember, empiricalism, extreme view of which one? Nurture, and nativist, extreme view of nature. So a nice AO3 to be brought in there. So let's just do a little bit of a recap on point 1 and 2 that's coming up. Point 1, nature is the deciding factor in the development of behaviour. For example, genes and hereditary are the fundamental importance. 2, we've looked at nurture is the deciding factor in the development of behaviour. The environmental factors are entirely responsible. So we've looked at both. However, and this is what we've got to be aware, can we truly look at things as pure nature or pure nurture? Don't they both rely on each other? Because both factors play an important role in determining human behaviour. Then neither can be regarded as the deciding factor. So if we're looking at hereditary, so nature, if we're looking at environment, can we just look at them on their own, or should we be looking at them? They actually have to be together. So it's really, really important that we need to look at the idea that both are fundamentally important. So if we accept that nurture is a deciding factor, then we must accept that all our behaviour is entirely down to if it's nature, internal factor, as if it's nurture, it's external factors. But we do need to consider the possibility that these factors are important in their own right, but they play a combination role because one of them can't be regarded as the deciding factor. Now, we've had lots of examples. Can you remember when we looked at PKU? I'll give you a moment. If you're not familiar with, refamiliarize yourself with PKU and its importance. And because remember, when we looked at the concept of PKU and the role it played with the child, PKUs, it was a very rare genetic abnormality. However, if that child was born and there was no additional factors to help support it, it would have severe learning difficulties. However, if it was put onto a modified diet, then the child wouldn't have learning difficulties. So PKU clearly shows the importance of nature, our genes, and nurture, the environment, the diet it had. So it is really important that both play a role in the development of our behaviour. And that's what we're going to explore, the idea of hereditary and the environment. For example, we've looked at twin studies. And I mentioned twin studies when, monozygotic 49% genetics with depression, dizygotic was only 17%. But twin studies, we look at the concordance rates. And what does that tell us? Is it purely genetic or environmental? So if we go back to depression and we found there was a concordance rate of 49% for monozygotic twins, that it was down to genes. That also tells us that it was down to 51% to the environment. for depression. So both factors were responsible. Remember, if the hereditary coefficient was 1, so 100%, then environment would have played no role. So here we're looking at this role that it has to take in both. Another example is our geno and phenotype. We've looked at geno and phenotype when we looked at the biological approach, and we know our genotype is our genetic makeup. It's part of our DNA. We're born with it. There's nothing we can do to alter it. So in terms used, describes a person's genetic makeup with all our hereditary information. When it comes to the phenotype, it's the expression of a person's genes. So it's how they are expressed in the world around us. So, let me just go back. I brought in a point. So what does that mean? Well, genotype is pure nature, not nurture, pure nature. However, phenotype is the expression of these genes. So it's how our genes are influenced from our environment. So it could be our lifestyle choices, our habits that we have, how we interact with the world. I came across a great example the other day. We all know flamingos and their pink colours. Well, actually, flamingos are white, but because it's the type of shrimp they eat, it causes them to turn pink. So technically, it's how they're interacting with the environment that gives them that pink colour. They are not, so their genotype is not pink. It's not saying, we're a pink coloured bird. I don't know how they sound, but my squeaky chair might sound like them. But it's the diet they eat of a specific type of shrimp that turns their feathers pink. Again, nature, nurture. Another example, we are all born with a certain level of melatonin that's in our skin, and that will be like the color of our skin. So that's our genotype. However, if we sunbathe, so we're in the sun, in the environment, what's going to happen? It's going to make our skin turn darker. A pure example of phenotype, how we interact with the world, the environment. So really, when it looks like hereditary environment, we can look at these different aspects. You know, our phenotype is not a standalone thing. We don't just have a genotype and it's pure genetics and that's how it is. You know, we can sit for 20 hours in the sun and we don't get our skin doesn't get a tan. It does get a tan, so that's how it's been expressed by the influence of the environment. Now, epigenetics is also linked to this idea of life experiences of previous generations. And actually, our experiences of previous generations, so how they've interacted with the world, actually becomes part of our genetic code, and then it gets passed on to further generations. So really a nice example of both now how we interact, but also how our ancestors or previous generations have interacted with their environment and how that's impacted on their genetic codes, and then it's been passed on. So really, it is, according to this debate, very difficult to have one extreme view. Now, let's look at a little bit of AO3, the influence of the environment that we can link in. It is very difficult to eliminate the influence of the environment, as each person will experience them different, even in the same family. For example, siblings, brothers and sisters. Now, brothers and sisters, genetically, you'll be similar, right? You'll have a certain amount of the same genes. However, it's how you experience. Now, we spoke about biological temperament before, that's part of our personality. Some may have one that makes them more anxious and others not, perhaps more aggressive, other ones not. So therefore, that means we will interact differently with the world around us. So things like our age, our gender, our sex, our temperament are all factors that will cause us to interact with the environment and experience things differently, even though we still have a very similar genetic makeup. So life events can impact on each person differently. For example, the birth of a new sibling, may cause one to be very jealous and possessive, where the other one is actually quite laid back and open to it. Moving home, the stresses of moving home, making new friends. One may take it in their stride, another brother or sister actually may become frustrated and angry. Parental divorce, how that impacts on them. Some children, they go through it with a breeze and they understand, where other ones don't. And same experience, but perhaps how their temperament is causes them to interact differently. So again, it does tell us that it is difficult to look at the idea of shared and unshared environments and how it impacts on us and how it can impact us on differently. And this can explain, perhaps, let's go back to monozygotic twins, how even though they're genetically the exact same and they're reared in the same environment, actually, it's how they interact with that environment that's going to be the influencing factors and perhaps cause difference in their experiences. So again, shared and unshared environments, it is very difficult to separate because the meaning of that interaction, of that experience, will be different for each person and will cause them then to behave differently. If it was purely genetics, then on monozygotic twins, you really expect them to behave and respond in the exact same way. But there's other factors, so the environment must play that role. So let's look at the interactionist approach. The idea that nature and nurture aspects of the debate are linked to such an extent that it would not make sense to see them as separate entities, but as a complete unit in the explanation of human behavior. Interactionists say, look, yes, we know there's nature where there's nurture, but we can't look at them as separate. They have to be, in order to explain behavior, seen together that makes a collective whole. For example, let's link this to attachment. Attachment patterns can be explained by how the child's temperament influences the interaction of a parent. Remember when we were looking at Ainsworth's strange situation, we looked at the different types and it was down to the mother's interaction with the child. And we had an AO3 that spoke about temperament. Well, maybe it's the temperament of the child. If it is a child that cries and screams and all the time and it doesn't smile, doesn't goo-goo, doesn't make all those noises, actually that might discourage the parent from interacting with it and interact with it in a certain way. Whereas one that is more, who doesn't cry as much unless there's an issue, it smiles and interacts more, that will encourage the parent to want to interact. And then it's that parent's interaction that creates the attachment. So again, this interaction support is very much in support of the idea, in order to understand human behavior, we need to see them together. Now, the Diathesis-stress model, we have looked at that before. Previously, you do know what it means, and we're just going to apply it here. Diathesis-stress model states that a person can be born with a genetic vulnerability. That genetic vulnerability is referred to as the diathesis and is only expressed when coupled together by an environmental or even another biological stressor, right, or trigger. So that means there is a genetic vulnerability, but there's an environmental or even a biological trigger that causes stress to the body that activates that genetic vulnerability, which will then affect the person's behavior. Again, it's this whole idea of nature and nurture. Because stressors, that means there's something in the environment that is having an impact on us physically. and that will cause the vulnerability to be triggered. So let's bring in one more AO3, because we've looked at the idea of bringing in the debate, determinism. We've looked at the implications of nativist empiricalism. We've looked at the idea of shared and unshared environments. So let's look at this idea of constructivism. You might kind of think, oh, that sounds complicated. Don't break it down to simple laws. Constructivism, construction, build. Think about it, and that's what it's all about. Sometimes words can sound scary, but if you try and break them down just by looking at the word, it can be very influential in your understanding. Now, constructivism says, they actually state that individuals actually seek and create an environment, so the nurture side, that meet or complements their own personal nature. So that means they will go out and seek environments that they find as suitable for them. So for example, and it's in your textbook as well, a child that is naturally aggressive will seek out others with similar behaviour, or a person that has got a natural sporting ability will then go and seek others with that type of environment so that they can engage in that type of environment. So this environment will influence and affect their development. So here, again, this is looking at the idea to support constructivism, supports the idea that we look at nature and nurture. They can't be separated, because depending on our nature, the traits that we are born with, our natural traits, innate traits that we have, we seek or we will create an environment in which we can engage or enhance that trait, and therefore interact with that environment, and that will affect our ability in our development. So here again, a nice AO3 that we can use to support the idea that we can't really look at the nature-nurture debate as single units to understand human behaviour completely. We need to be able to understand that people themselves will seek out environments to develop their natural traits that they may have. Now, really important, use your textbook and this video to make your notes. As you're going through it, pause the video, make your notes. Again, if you've got any questions that pop to mind, write it down, then send me an email. You all have my email, and I will get back to you at some stage. I will, I promise, right? But take your time to go over this debate. Yes, we have individuals, empiricalists and nativists, that will take the extreme views. But we also have the interactionists who say, hold on, matey, to understand human behaviour, we need to understand what the nature debate is, what the nurtures debate is, and how they work together. Well, my lovelies, happy learning. Remember, I'm just an email away, so take care and be good. Happy learning.